Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us and welcome on behalf of the U.S. Department of State. My name is Rima Mandwi, and I'm really excited to be hosting this session today. I have a group of 3 panelists here with us. We're all from very different areas at the State Department, and we're going to be providing an overview of the State Department's policy work on human rights, and not just kind of human rights broadly, but what does serving diversity and inclusion and equity and accessibility, what does that look like in the United States' human rights foreign policy? What does it look like to talk about and work through racial equity and justice and work for underserved communities? So like I said, my name is Rima Mandwi. I work in the State Department's Bureau of Global Public Affairs. I am a campaign manager working on long-term strategic communications around anything and everything human rights and democracy. I will go ahead and do some intros for my amazing colleagues on the line with us. We'll start out with Lily Calafell, who is a Foreign Affairs Officer in the Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor in the Office of Multilateral and Global Affairs. We have Francisco Bencosme, who's a Senior Advisor for the Bureau of East Asian and Pacific Affairs, and Greg Pardo, who is an International Affairs Officer for the Migration Working Group in the Bureau of Western Hemisphere Affairs. So we'll start out with Lily, if you want to do a little introduction and talk a little bit about how you got to the State Department and what is your current role, how it ties to human rights policy, and specifically how your area of focus has integrated racial equity and DEIA.
Great. Well, thank you so much and welcome to everyone. Rima, I appreciate the opportunity to speak with our students and fellow participants. So again, my name is Lily Calafell. I work for the Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor, focusing on multilateral and global affairs. I work to promote and protect civic space, both in and out of the UN system, also focusing on human rights defenders, both in and out of the US and EU Trade and Technology Council Working Group. My work essentially is, again, promoting that civic space and ensuring that we're furthering fundamental freedoms and human rights for all. So how I started, I was interning for the Department of Homeland Security for free. And so I decided to make it a point to get on USA Jobs. And for about half of my shift every day, I would send hundreds of applications government-wide. I was lucky enough to receive a Pathways internship opportunity with the Bureau of Consular Affairs, the Charleston Passport Center. This time it was paid. So from there, I moved into the the intelligence community. I was in the Bureau of Intelligence and Research, and then I moved on to the Bureau of Diplomatic Security, which is where I realized that my passion was not necessarily in law enforcement and intelligence work per se, but rather foreign policy and specifically human rights promotion. So the Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor really champions American values, including the rule of law and individual rights that promote strong, stable, and prosperous and sovereign states. We advance American security in the struggle against authoritarianism and terrorism when we stand for the freedoms of religion, speech, and the press, and the rights of people to assemble peacefully and to petition their government for a redress of grievances. With respect to work focusing on racial equity and support for undeserved communities and diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, our office co-led our efforts at the United Nations, for example, in the March 2021 joint statement signed on by over 156 member states at the 46th session of the Human Rights Council. And we continue to find opportunities to properly elevate this issue, both at home and abroad. With respect to LGBTQI+ persons, this portfolio is also one that sits within our bureau. Together with our state colleagues department-wide, we've worked diligently to carry out President Biden's robust support of LGBTQI+ persons. Our office closely engages with the Special Envoy for LGBTQI+ persons, Jessica Stern, and we look forward to continuing to support efforts in this space. Another topic that's not always quickly thought about is persons with disabilities. Now, disability rights is yet another portfolio that sits in my office. are subject matter experts in this field. They work tirelessly to further accessibility for persons with disabilities and operate on the fact that disability rights are an American success story. Our values of freedom, equality, and justice are supported on a bipartisan basis, and our monitoring of other countries' records affirms our commitment to independence, accessibility, and full participation of persons with disabilities on an equal basis with others. I'm excited to speak with you all today and take your questions, and I'll back over to you, Rima.
Thank you so much, Lily, for that overview. I think we at the department all know that DRL has a huge portfolio, and I think the great thing about hearing how you got to this position is for everyone tuning in to see that it's not always a linear path, and there are so many different paths that you can take and areas to work in at the State Department. So with that, I would love to hand it over to Francisco, if you can talk to us about how you got here and what your focus is.
Thanks so much, Rima. It's such an honor to be here with you all and be able to speak with such a esteemed audience. And it was really a pleasure to be here with my other colleagues. I learned a lot from Lily's story. So I was born and raised in Queens, New York. I'm a queer, raised by single mom, Latinx, professional, trying to make it in the foreign policy world. I spent 5 years on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee as starting off my career, but I didn't really start off there. I was a high school and college debate nerd before that, and was really interested in foreign policy debates and wanted to be able to take some of the things we were learning in classroom to be able to translate into actual real policy making. Unfortunately, when I moved to DC, I didn't know how to do that. I was an unpaid intern for about a year, which was a really difficult struggle to kind of go through. And I oftentimes thought about why was it so difficult to get underrepresented communities to really sort of be part of the conversation within DC. And ultimately, what after going through several unpaid internships, various struggles in terms of means of being able to afford housing, but also, sort of figure out how to break into the professional world. I started off my career on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. It was in part because of different affinity groups, like the Hispanic Staff Association on the Hill, as well as the Senate Diversity Initiative, that really helped me get my foot in the door into the halls of Congress. After working in Congress for 5 years, I moved over to become an advocate at one of the largest human rights organization, Amnesty International. After that, I then went to Open Society Foundation for a year before joining the State Department with the Biden-Harris administration. I think throughout my career, one of the things I've been able to work on is really working with human rights activists, working with civil society, and bringing them into the foreign policy world. I particularly work in the East Asia and Pacific Bureau, which means that we focus on issues such as China, North Korea, Burma, Australia, Pacific states. And I think oftentimes what is lost in the conversation is how does this impact regular people, and how does this impact parts of the community and parts of those societies that are often most marginalized. And so I've really taken it upon myself in my role as a senior advisor to the Assistant Secretary to really bring those voices, bring those stories to a lot of the work that we do. I'll give you a concrete example. One of the first visits that the Secretary of State, Tony Blinken, did was to Japan, Korea, and then to meet with its counterparts in China. After that, it was around the same time that the Georgia murders happened, particularly against the API community. And so one of the things we did was we convened API civil society leaders who work at the intersection of foreign policy and domestic racism and discrimination work to talk about how our foreign policy, particularly our policy towards relations with the PRC, aka China, to be able to make sure that it was done in a non-discriminatory way. And I think it was that roundtable and then subsequently a public event that we hosted a couple weeks ago, which I think was really important to have a conversation about race, about discrimination in the API community, and how us in foreign policy can really build guardrails against racism, against discrimination. And it's really that sort of lens both D&I, racism, and human rights that I really hope to continue to work on through our foreign policy making process. So I'll leave it there and look forward to the discussion. Thank you again.
Thank you, Francisco. We really appreciate all of the background and context, and having a concrete example, I think is exactly what all of the folks tuning in need to hear. I think it's probably hard to imagine how exactly there is an overlap in federal government and the State Department and foreign policy with the very real issues that we see through, whether it's tragedies, systemic racism, and the real marginalization of underserved communities. So thank you for that background. Excited to hand it over to Greg, if you can talk about your experience, especially in the foreign service community, and how you got here and where you currently work.
Sure. Well, thank you, Rima. Good afternoon to everybody. And it's a pleasure to be here with Francisco and Lily. They're all stars in their own right. And it's an honor to be here on the same panel. So my name is Greg Pardo. I'm from San Antonio, Texas, from the West Side specifically. I also went to St. Mary's University, which is an Hispanic serving institution, so proud of that. But I'm a U.S. Foreign Service officer, and I came into the Foreign Service through the Rangel Fellowship. It's just like the Pickering Fellowship, and I think you've heard about this, I think, during the first session of the day. I learned about the Rangel Fellowship when I was volunteering. You can call it an unpaid internship for 2 years in Bangladesh doing rural development. And the military took over after the two political parties were going at it on the streets, and elections were suspended. And I saw how that impacted our development projects. So I saw how important it was to be at the table, and in that case, being a diplomat. I returned, I applied for the Rangel Fellowship, and I was able to secure it back in 2008. I went to the University of Texas at Austin at the LBJ school there to study public affairs. And that, because of the Rangel Fellowship, it took me into an internship on the Hill, and also an internship at our U.S. Embassy in Burma. And again, that took me in, it brought me together with civil society leaders, human rights leaders in Burma. Also here when I was on the Hill, meeting a lot of advocates for human rights leaders around the world here on the Hill who were advocating for those individuals. After joining the State Department, I came in, I worked on the Cuba desk where I was in charge of our democracy programs on the island. And so supporting a lot of human rights groups such as Las Amas de Blanco. And then after that, I went over to India for almost 5 years. I did 2 years as a staff assistant and consular officer, and then I did an assistant public affairs officer in Kolkata, where I did a lot of work, public diplomacy programs that would focus on exchanges, really trying to empower civil society leaders, specifically human rights leaders who were working against human trafficking. And it was a really fine line that we had to walk, because you also don't want to get them in trouble. So you always have to ensure that you're listening to these leaders to see how best you can help them, as opposed to saying, I have the answers. And that I came back to Washington, where I've continued to work on South Asia. I worked on India, Nepal, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, focused on public diplomacy programs on regional connectivity and also civil society. And then these past 2 years, I was working on Palestinian affairs, where I was focused, especially this past year since the Biden administration came in, on reestablishing U.S.-Palestinian ties. And we fund security coordination with the Palestinian Authority. And one of the big things that we heard from Palestinian civil society is that we need to make sure that we're protecting human rights, Palestinian human rights. And I was fortunate enough to be a part of the process of preparing the secretary for when he went out to Jerusalem and to the West Bank for his first meeting, not just with Palestinian leaders, say the Palestinian Authority, but also civil society leaders, which was really important. And we talked about how we come here not with all the answers, but with examples of what's going on in the United States in terms of how things are changing here. The past 2 months, I've switched assignments after completing that assignment and working on the Migration Working Group, where we're working a lot on screening for protection, especially for migrants coming through from the Western Hemisphere. And again, a focus on what can we do to address the root causes, whether human rights, rule of law, in the different countries that migrants come from, and identifying what is forcing folks to leave. And talking about the DE&I lens, or the diversity, inclusion, and inclusion lens, one thing I've always taken with me, no matter where I go, is that I recognize that I don't look like an American diplomat, quote unquote. They're always expecting something different, maybe a white male, blonde hair. And I've gotten that. It's like, where are you from? Or you don't look American. But I talk about that story, about how me, a Mexican American, a Chicano from the west side of San Antonio, has been able to come to the table to contribute on foreign policy. And this is really important, especially when we're reaching out to marginalized communities who we need to engage on regarding human rights issues. So that's something that I feel and I believe has always helped me gain the trust of our partners and help us be more effective in our human rights policy. And aside from that, I've worked a lot in the community, trying to recruit more Hispanic and Latinx students. These past 2 years, I was HECFA president, which is amazing. And it's so great to see this program today happening, because it's something that we've been calling for. I'm just really appreciative of the department's efforts, and also the current executive board, HECFA board, for pushing this through. So looking forward to our conversation and your questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Greg, and to everyone for your introductions. You obviously all have very different current jobs, and you all have very unique and diverse backgrounds. But I think that one thing that's really important to talk through, and everyone who's tuning in now knows this really well, DEIA, diversity and equity, inclusion and access, they feel like buzzwords now, right? They're like these trending terms that I'm sure students are hearing about in school, and we hear about in the bureaucracy, and it's a part of the public conversation. And I think sometimes there's confusion about what is the value of DEIA? Like, is DEIA just a nice to have? I think that we all know, as people of color, as people from underserved communities, that it's not just nice to have. And it's really great to see our administration and the State Department talking about diversity and addressing racial injustice and supporting underserved communities. It's not just a nice to have, it's a national security imperative. It's something that is really, really important for us to address. And I would love to ask each of you, as your experience in the Hispanic and Latinx community, how do you see your individual role, your background as a part of that community, as an imperative for the United States government being able to effectively be a champion for these communities, whether or not it's your community, if it's Palestinians, or if it's a different Hispanic or Latinx community, or AAPI, or the Black American community. I would love to hear more about how you feel like your background has helped drive that foreign policy imperative. And let's start with Willie. We'd love to hear more.
Great, thank you, Rima, and absolutely. It's been my experience in the department that as members of the Latinx community, we are viewed as a strength to our foreign policy around the world. I think Greg intimated to this a bit earlier, but we really do hold a unique privilege in having a deeply rooted understanding of what life without democracy and fundamental freedoms is. I think that the department is keenly aware of this unique perspective that all of us brings to the work. For example, as an American with Cuban roots, I bring reality and practicality to the fight against authoritarianism. I bring a gut check, and I really humanize the words reported by civil society and human rights defenders around the world. I think that real and unique perspective really helps us to not only shape and recommend good, effective, meaningful policy efforts, but I think it helps us to do our job better, and it helps us innovate in our fight toward global democracy and human rights. Just recently, Secretary Blinken sat down with our HECFA president, Izzy Romero, and he underscored his appreciation for the work and the countless contributions of us, the Latinx community in the department. And that's just one way that we see how the department's recognizing our value. And it really should confirm to all of us that our voices matter and they're being heard at the highest levels. More to the fact, President Biden noted in his proclamation last month that Hispanic Heritage Month is an important reminder of how much strength we draw as a nation from our immigrant roots and our values as a nation of immigrants. So Yeah, in short, the top recognizes the power in all of our diversity and the benefits of having a diverse and equitable pool at the table where democracy and human rights is furthered. I think is testament alone of how we are a national or imperative. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. I think everything you said is spot on. And I think, yes, Francisco, please chime in.
No, want to echo a lot of what Lily said. Diversity and inclusion, it's not just a buzzword. It's not just what's in right now. It's a national security imperative. I'll give maybe two other concrete examples that I've run into in my life. The first is that my former boss, now chairman of the Student Foreign Policy Committee, Bob Menendez, the first Hispanic chairman to ever hold that spot, used to say that when he visited Beijing, when he would run into a Black American foreign service officer, and she would always say how the fact that she was able to speak with civil society survivors of Tiananmen Square and relate the own struggles of civil rights movement in her own community to the struggles of Tiananmen Square victims and survivors, that was a unique connection that only diverse representatives community can really share. In my own personal life, I work a lot on the Rohingya crisis, which was an atrocity that was committed against, the Rohingya ethnic minority in Burma. And I remember speaking with officials from the embassy in my previous capacities. And one of the reasons that they would give was around immigration. And they said, look, the same way that the United States enforces immigration orders, it's the same way we're treating this ethnic minority, protecting our own sovereignty. And I spoke about my own connection to the immigration experience and the sort of pain and suffering that it inflicted here as why that was a false comparison, and why that comparison only further proved why those human rights violations should not be upheld. Ultimately, diversity creates more innovative thinking. It allows us to look at issues from different perspectives, and it's also about who we are. Increasingly, the Hispanic community is a larger percentage of the American population, and we need to be part of the foreign policy making process because the United States is truly more representative of a diverse constituency, and so should our foreign policy. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. It is so imperative to have people who are representative, and I think that President Biden and Secretary Blinken and all of the administration have made very clear that we need our federal workforce to reflect America in all of its diversity and in all of the different levels of diversity that we have. It's so important. We're not able to be a global leader and work on these issues and do it well unless we have folks like the people who are tuning in and like the three of you at the table doing the work. So Greg, would love to hear more about your specific experience as a part of this community and how you've seen your role as imperative to your human rights work.
Well, specific experience. I think growing up in a bilingual household, also being a first generation college student. I came from a working class community in the west side of San Antonio, and I knew how it was to be viewed differently by other parts, by people from other parts of the city. And they didn't have to say anything. It's just, when people ask you, where are you from in San Antonio? If they find out you're from San Antonio, they're also from San Antonio, and you say that, and they're like, oh, okay. They have that facial expression. You're like, well, what does that mean? But being able to come from a community that is not viewed as an equal by other communities, having that ability, and also being able to go back and forth as what we want to call code switching. I speak very differently with a lot of my friends who are in the west side of San Antonio than I do, with others, right? And being able to do that. And those skills there have helped me out tremendously while in the field, whether it was in Burma, Bangladesh, whether it's in the West Bank or East Jerusalem. Having that ability to adjust and adapt to people's way of communicating, maybe their hospitality. And that is so imperative in gaining somebody's trust. And gaining somebody's trust is extremely important in diplomacy. And so it teaches you, and this is why the philosophy has always been for me, is that go beyond DC, go beyond the halls of Congress, go beyond the halls of the United Nations, the halls of the State Department. You have to go and meet people where they're at. And so that's something, because I was one of those individuals who wasn't being met by key leaders, right? I come from those communities. And I also come from a community that has many activists who have come from there. The Rosie Castros, the Emma Tenayucas, they've all come out of there. And Henry Cisneros, who have become big leaders, the Castro brothers. I know Joaquin's going to be speaking later today. These are individuals who came from my community, my neighborhood, who fought for our rights. And I think having that ability when I'm sitting down at the table with civil rights leaders or civil society leaders, I think, and then me telling them a little bit about our story. I think for us, at least as a Mexican American, we always share a lot. And so that's important. You want to gain somebody's trust. In terms of, I agree with Francisco and Lily. The diversity and inclusion is a key priority for us, but we need to make it happen as a community. So it's not enough that our leaders say they have it. I know they've committed to it, so has a president, but us as a community, as State Department employees, we need to continue to revisit this and examine our actions as a whole. Because otherwise, even if leaders commit to it, it's not going to happen if the community doesn't commit to it. And I just want to put it out there because that's so important. We have leaders who make statements, we make statements, but it's the community. And how are we, and this is something we're doing constantly within offices, within a bureau, to examine how are we treating each other? Are we giving are we giving people from underserved or underrepresented communities key positions that will help them in their promotion? Well, are they getting those key assignments? Those are questions that we're going to continue to ask. Are we treating each other with respect? I've been in situations where I've been called something and I'm in a workplace. And so we have to hold ourselves accountable and continue to commit ourselves to that, because otherwise we'll forget about it. And then it does become a trend. So,
Greg, that's absolutely correct. And it's a perfect transition into the next question I wanted to ask this group. Everything that you're talking about, where we're talking about rapport building, right? We're talking about transparency because we come from these communities and we are serving foreign audiences around the world, and each country and all of the different communities around the world, they all have their own social dynamics and their own issues with marginalization. And so when folks like us have a seat at the table and we're able to work, we can move that goal and make progress because we have that rapport and there's a level of trust and there's a level of transparency and honesty about who we are and where we came from. And the lessons that we've learned came out of the challenges that we've faced for being a part of an underserved community and being thankful to be a part of that community. So what I really would love to talk about now is when we talk about racial equity and justice in the context of human rights and democracies, our communities know, the Hispanic and Latinx community knows very well that first and foremost, it starts with accountability, exactly like you said. And it starts with an honest assessment of what is the issue at hand, what is the reality, and what is causing that reality. And for the United States right now, and for the entire world, our challenge is dismantling systemic racism and trying to address, honestly, how we advocate for underserved communities. And so I want to ask each of you, what message do you have for the students who are tuning in today about accountability? What does humility look like for the United States to acknowledge openly that we have a lot of work to do and we're striving to be a more perfect union, but we're not perfect. And there's a lot that the United States can learn from folks like you and the folks tuning in about what accountability and honesty and transparency looks like. So what role do the students who are tuning in have today in civic engagement in helping the United States and helping their own communities address injustices and make things better? So Lily, we'll start with you.
Great, thank you. And I think, Rima, you summarized it quite perfectly. You have to lead with the truth and you have to lead with humility. And I think this administration has has been pretty clear in that being one of their primary goals. I think we can all agree and recognize that racism, police violence, and government accountability should be a part of any discussion about human rights and fundamental freedoms anywhere in the world. The US has worked to be quite transparent and accountable on these issues. But I think also acknowledging that there's more work to be done at home goes a long way. We're committed to striving further to create a fairer and more just society. We're always talking about restoring our democracy at home and how it's a critical part of our foreign policy vision. But it's really, having the self-awareness that we can't be credible advocates for democracy and human rights abroad if we're not demonstrating our commitment to these principles at home. And so I think I can lead by example here. When I was interviewing for this position that I'm in now, one of my questions back to the interviewer, who's now my team lead, I basically said, so how are we talking about human rights and democracy these days? It was quite after the January 6th riots, and that was my question: is how are we leading with our best foot forward? And one of the most inspiring responses that I got from her and the panel was, we lead with the truth. We don't hide from it. And I think that's the fundamental difference between democracy, a true, fully functioning, vibrant democracy, and one that only pretends to be one. I don't think, and I'm sure that all of us here can confirm that we don't claim to be perfect in our foreign policy spaces. Whatever our shortcomings are, they don't detract from the truth that all people are free and equal in dignity and rights. And I think we lead with that every time we're at a table. President Biden has made clear that he intends to put that truth at the center of that agenda. And so for students interested in civic engagement, for those of you listening in today, what I want to tell you is bring it on. We welcome your perspectives. We want to hear from you. We want your recommendations. We know and we understand that your voice matters and that the unique contributions that each of you bring are only going to serve to make us a stronger republic. So bring it on. Thanks.
Lily, I love it. That's the perfect, it's the perfect mantra. We do, all of the students who are tuning in, and even for each other, our colleagues, and especially our colleagues who represent underserved communities from around the world who have diverse backgrounds, and we want everyone to bring it on. I love that. Francisco, I'd love to hear from you. Let's talk honesty and accountability. What do you have for these students?
Absolutely. First, I want to make a shout out for the Summit for Democracy US, what students can do. For the first time ever, President Biden is bringing together world leaders to really have an honest conversation about democracy. And at the heart of that is this conversation about humility. It's about breaking down systemic racism. The United States does not have all the answers, and we should start at that, at that starting point, and really bring other countries, and as well as civil society, local leaders, private sector, to really have a conversation about, what is the future of democracy look like, and how can we continue to empower those voices that support it. So I really invite students who are watching now to join and get involved as part of the conversation for the Summit for Democracy. Second is that I was a former activist, and so I know that there are many ways as part of various civil society organizations to talk about mass atrocities that are happening around the world, to sort of connect with other students around the world. Again, not because we have all the right answers or because our country is the perfect model or has done everything right, but because these issues are universal. Because as Lily was saying, the world came together after World War II, after some of the worst period in human history, to say, look, we have to create and really come together for some universal human rights declaration to really prevent this from ever happening again. And those are the types of norms, international law, that we try to uphold. So, and maybe the last thing I'll end with, and it's a version of what Lily said, which is just be your unapologetic, authentic self. Really bring all of that you have to the table, to the classroom, to national conversations. You know, when somebody says something that you think is inappropriate or might, you know, evoke racism or be a microaggression, hold them accountable. Use it. It's up to you whether you want to use it as a teaching moment or really find other ways of accountability. But don't ever forget who you are. Have that purpose. That broader purpose for me was about human rights and bringing participation into the national policy making. But really bring that purpose and be who you are and contribute to the conversation, because we really do need your intellect and your voices. So thank you.
Thank you, Francisco. I love the call for accountability. I think it's so important. And I think all of us know the realities of code switching. And obviously, you need to code switch, not just professionally and in lots of different situations in our lives, but feeling comfortable, being authentic, and being your true self in a professional environment, especially in US government and for foreign audiences. Being true to yourself is part of the American dream, and it is a part of the mission that we're trying to move forward. And so part of the honesty assessment is I do want to encourage the students who are tuning in. If you have questions, please do add them to the chat box, because we are here to give our most honest assessment of what this experience is like. And I think, like Francisco said, you might have experiences where you're going to have to hold someone accountable. Being authentic and true doesn't mean it's going to be easy. And Greg has noted that, you know, we've all been in situations that are maybe uncomfortable, and it's about learning how to navigate and becoming stronger out of your confidence in the power of accountability. So Greg, if you want to speak more about your experiences and what accountability looks like, we'd love to hear it.
Well, accountability is so important. If you see something, say something. That's my philosophy. If it makes you feel bad, if you receive an email that has something racist in it, say something about it. Don't wait. Say something about it. And I know it's difficult because sometimes we fall into the trap of groupthink. It's like, well, should I speak up, or is the other person going to speak up? Well, maybe I should just stay quiet. And I think that's where it's important to, if you feel bad, just pull the person aside or maybe say something there. But also make sure that within your communities, whether it's student organizations, your schools, church groups, whatever you're a part of, set up those norms about equality and justice. Don't just talk about them, but reflect on how you can address them, or what is an injustice and what does it look like, and how can you address it? Get involved in your communities. Again, whether it's on campus, if it's in community, I was involved a lot in voter registration, and especially in parts of town where people didn't want to go and knock on doors because they thought it was too dangerous. I'd go in there and talk to people, and a lot of them were like my grandmothers and grandfathers and uncles and aunts, my tios and tias, and it was amazing to just get that conversation going, getting to know our communities better, but also knowing what issues matter to them. And so there's many ways you can do that. And as Francisco said, there's so many campaigns out there that you can get involved with. If there's something that you care about in your community or at the national level or at the global level, get involved in it, because this is where you can really get your feet wet, get your hands dirty, see what you're good at. You start identifying what skills you're good at. Some people love to do policy analysis. Others like to do events management. Others like to do, data collection, and data is so important. You'll find out later. You'll find out why, because you know who's out there. But you start identifying your skills, but more importantly, you start identifying what drives you, and that's really important. I know it sounds cliche, but you start identifying what your drive is, and you start learning more and more about yourself, and that's extremely important. Even at my age, I still reflect on what about my culture makes me. Why is it important to me? Why will I never get rid of that? And how does it drive me? And that's something that you always have to ensure you're taking care of. And don't forget to get mentors, because mentors are extremely important. They're the ones who will help you, especially when you get knocked off. Because trust me, you will get knocked off your horse. a bunch of times on this kind of work, but it's important to have those mentors out there.
The power of community, the power of having support and mentors. And I think you've all said very eloquently that we need to be authentic and true to ourselves, because that is representative of America, and we don't necessarily have it all figured out. You know, you don't get your job at the State Department or, you know, join government and poof, now everything's good and now everything's figured out. We're gonna face challenges, and we need to work together and feel like we have support in our communities to be able to have honest conversations. And holding someone accountable doesn't necessarily have to be problematic or confrontational, but it's about striving to have something better. And I think in a meta way, that's exactly what the United States is currently experiencing. We're going through a period where we're trying to address our shortcomings and address our challenges. And sometimes that's painful and sometimes it's ugly. But it's something that we're all committed to doing. And hopefully a lot of the folks who are tuning in are interested in dedicating their career to that. One question that we got in the chat box from one of the students is a very, very interesting question about an issue that even President Biden and the entire administration has acknowledged. The threat of white supremacy is very real, and it's something that the entire world is trying to assess the right way to deal with. I think white supremacy in as extremism around the world has obviously caused a lot of pain and suffering and violence. But I think that folks here are asking about, how do you all deal with white privilege in your space? And how do you find balance between your experiencing representing the United States? And as you know, Greg has mentioned, a lot of times folks like us might be in the room and the person in the room with us is like, I wasn't expecting to see someone who looks like you. How do you deal with that on a day-to-day basis, especially in recognizing the expectation of what it means to be an American and how that definition is evolving every single day because of the work that you all are doing? How do you all cope with that dichotomy and face the daunting feeling of kind of fighting against white privilege and whiteness? I will open it up if any of you want to chime in there.
I'll go ahead and try to address it. I think one is when incidents like it was a few months ago, it was all over the news that there had been a swastika that was etched into one of the elevators at the State Department. At the top, I was really excited. I was really comforted by the fact that the secretary made sure to put out a statement on that and saying that they were looking into it and obviously investigating. There's also been stories about officials who are blogging and have very white supremacist views and they're working at the State Department. The fact that they're acknowledging and trying to address, that's really important. That side is extremely important because when folks see that and employees see that happening, we know that our leaders are taking this seriously, and you need that. I think at a lower level, at a micro level, it's so important to continue to have these conversations. One thing that was started by the Office of Civil Rights here at the State Department a couple of years ago is having those honest conversations. And there were moderated, facilitated discussions about instances where people felt that they were slighted because they didn't look American, times where they felt that white privilege was being used, if not by coworkers, but maybe people in host countries, and how that impacts them. Because I think a lot of people of color, including myself, we've been told by folks who are not a person of color, oh, it's okay, don't take it too seriously. When somebody says something about, well, you don't look American, or they mistake me for the guard or the driver. Sometimes, yeah, I can use it as a teaching moment and talk about how I'm a diplomat, but other times it does wear on you. And so it's important to have those conversations going. And it won't be solved with one course. It won't be solved with one discussion, or it won't be solved with, celebrating a month, right? of a particular ethnic group, it has to happen continuously. And holding ourselves accountable, addressing those issues, taking the complaints seriously. Supervisors need to ensure that employees feel comfortable enough to submit a complaint. Empower, as employees want to feel empowered to do that and have those honest conversations. That's the only way you can address it. And as you said, Rima, just like our country is striving towards protection, the State Department too is striving towards that goal of ridding ourselves of white supremacy, of unconscious bias. It's a continuous struggle, I would say.
Yes, absolutely. It's something that we deal with every single day, whether you work at the State Department or in US government or any person of color in America and obviously around the world, marginalized communities. We deal with addressing white privilege and assessing where we are in that balance every single day. And I think that goes to show that the folks who are tuning in with us, you'll be great working in this space. You can make a great diplomat and represent America abroad, because the experience that you authentically know and live every single day will help move this country forward. So Francisco or Lily, did either of you want to chime in on that question before we go to our last one? Lily, please.
Yeah, sure, thank you. So I want to go back, after all, we're talking, our participants are largely college students and others, and the conversation and the question really took me back to my undergraduate days, where I had someone who doesn't deserve to be named basically tell me, you'll never make it in the State Department, you'll never make it in government, you're not white, pale, and yale, so you need to find something a little bit more in your lane. And I want, for those that are listening that this may resonate with, I want this to be your 2:48 p.m. reminder that you don't listen to those things, that you listen to your heart, you remain resilient, and you persevere above all of it. Like Greg said, there's opportunities to make things a teaching moment. There's opportunities for you to stand firmly in opposition to rhetoric like that. And there's also time to stand quiet, go under your rock, work hard, and get to where you want to get to. And my path, as Rima mentioned, my path was anything but linear, but here I am. And the only thing that stands me apart from Lily at 21 hearing that I'm not white, pale, and yale, so I'll never make it, and Lily now, is that I didn't stop working. I didn't stop striving for what I wanted. And so I think that's also very important, is that it's a rough road ahead, especially for those of us, minorities, Latinas, Latinos. It's difficult, but don't let any of that stop you. And the fact that you're listening in today shows everyone that you are dedicated to your work and to your academic career. And just want to make sure that that didn't go unsaid. You do matter and you are valued, and keep pushing.
Thank you so much, Lily. And I think exactly like Greg said, you both echoed this. It's about making choices every single day. It's about showing up and being yourself and assessing, putting one foot in front of the other. Francisco, would love to hear your thoughts on this and what your daily mechanisms are in this space.
Yeah, thank you. I think, first of all, certainly agree with my other colleagues. We all have a role to play, an individual role. And I think what scares those who, suppress these views is to see us succeed, right? And so if you work hard, if you're the best version of yourself, that is ultimately going to scare them. And it's ultimately what they're trying to achieve is to get you off your path. And so really sticking to that, as Lily said, I think is really important. This was my own personal take on this, is also that you also have to think systemically and structurally. So it wasn't enough for me to be the first Latino who worked for the first chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, I made sure that I joined the Congressional Hispanic Staff Association, and we created a House Diversity Initiative so that both on the House and the Senate, there were plenty of other Latinos who were coming up behind me, next to me, ahead of me, to also fill in the ranks, to really change the environment that looks around me. Every interview that I ever have before a job, I ask them what they're doing about creating an inclusive environment. Not only because I usually have done my homework, so I already know a little bit about the work environment, but I want to hear them speak about it. And I want to see whether they're picking up that this matters and hold them accountable, even through the interview process. You don't just get one Latino when you hire me, you get somebody who's going to be in your face about this all the time and make sure that he's not the last one. So it's about finding those own ways individually to also really hold people accountable and try to make the systems and structure more equitable for everyone. So.
That is really great insight. And I think, like I said, all of these folks who are tuning in, they're probably all nodding along. They're probably like, yep, I've felt that in school. I felt that in my local communities. I've felt that in my day-to-day life. So because we have 2 minutes left, hard stop, I want to thank the three of you for your brilliance, for your insight, for your commitment to public service. I think everyone here knows, and I certainly know, that we are so lucky to have you working for the State Department and representing the United States, both at home and abroad. I want to pass it back to each of you one at a time. If you have one sentence, final words, a mantra that has gotten you through, I think that would be a great way to sum up our talk. So Greg, let's start with you.
Keep on keeping on. That's all I have to say. Keep on keeping on.
I love it. Keep on keeping on. Lily?
I'm going to unapologetically put a plug in for the State Department and just really quickly mention that pick a struggle, any struggle, and there's an office for that at the State Department. So keep on fighting, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you so much. And Francisco, parting words.
One that always sort of really echoes with me is in Espanol, it's dime con quién andas y te diré quién eres, which translates to tell me who you're with and I'll tell you who you are. And when I look back at the comment I made about really sort of putting that ladder, so that others can climb it after you, I think those things are connected. It's about who do you want to support, build that community in that environment around you that really speaks about the kind of person you are. So figure that part out, figure who you want to be, and surround yourself around those people, and you'll see that good things happen. So.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for tuning in with us today. Greg, Francisco, Lily, it was such a privilege to chat with you. And to everyone tuning in, we can't wait to see you on our team and hopefully work with you all one day. And you have a great set of panelists coming up at 3 and 4. So thank you everyone for joining us, and take care.
I hope you have been enjoying today's Student Foreign Policy Symposium in honor of Hispanic Heritage Month. My name is Julieta Valls-Noyes. I have been a Foreign Service Officer with the State Department for 36 years. It's hard to believe it's been that long because the time has flown by. Serving my country as an FSO has been an immensely fulfilling and rewarding job, and one I hope you will consider yourselves. To give you an example of a Foreign Service career, I thought I would tell you a little about myself. I got the foreign affairs bug early. My mom and dad had to leave their own country, Cuba, in 1960 to start a new life in the United States. My brother and I were born in the States. Our parents taught us the value of freedom, of standing up for justice, and of patriotism to their new country. Working at the State Department has been, among other things, a way of thanking this country for welcoming my family so warmly. When I was a child, our family moved to Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, due to my dad's job. We lived there for 3 years, then moved to Quito, Ecuador. That's where I had my quinceañera and decided I wanted to be a diplomat, like so many of my friends' parents. I took the Foreign Service exam as a college senior. I was very nervous, but got distracted from the nerves by the cute guy taking the exam the same day. Fast forward a few decades. I passed the exam, and so did the cute guy. We've been married for 35 years, and until my husband retired, we enjoyed being what we call a tandem couple, where both spouses are in the Foreign Service. Nick and I spent the first part of our careers working in Latin America, serving in Guatemala, Mexico, and Panama, and covering Latin American issues in Washington. During that time, we had 3 kids born in 3 countries. Like other Foreign Service generalists, I did a wide variety of work, adjudicating visas, political reporting, foreign assistance oversight, and even a stint as an embassy spokesperson. Later in my career, I took assignments in Spain and at the U.S. Embassy to the Vatican. I also held jobs in Washington, including in the Operations Center, the State Department's 24-hour Crisis Management and Communications Center. When I was a Deputy Executive Secretary, I organized trips for 2 Secretaries of State. I visited places like East Timor, Russia, and Israel, and ate things like yak and sea slugs. As a Deputy Assistant Secretary in the European Bureau, I managed relations with 12 countries in Western Europe and the European Union, working on everything from military coalitions to trade negotiations to organizing state visits. From 2015 to 2017, I was the U.S. Ambassador to the Republic of Croatia, a fascinating, beautiful country. That assignment won me points with my kids because it's where they filmed the King's Landing scenes in Game of Thrones. More seriously, it was an honor to represent the American people and government to a country that's a NATO ally and member of the European Union. For the last 3 years, I was the Deputy Director and later the Acting Director of the Foreign Service Institute, the main foreign affairs training center of the U.S. government. At FSI, we teach languages, tradecraft, leadership, and more to employees of over 50 government agencies. It's where we prepare officers at every level, including ambassadors, for their next overseas assignments. And if you decide to join the State Department, it is where you will begin your careers. I am currently President Biden's nominee to be Assistant Secretary for Population, Refugees, and Migration. It's an honor to be the first person ever nominated for this position from a refugee background. I have had my Senate hearing and I'm awaiting a vote in the Senate on my nomination. If confirmed, I look forward to leading State Department efforts to support persecuted and vulnerable people around the world. I don't know what your mental image of a State Department employee may have been before today, but hopefully hearing my story shows that an American diplomat can be someone like you. Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the symposium.